After officially dividing the house, my daughter threw me on a mattress on the laundry room floor. Better than nothing, right? What she didn't know was that I had already transferred all my assets during my lifetime, and that property was no longer mine. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. After officially dividing the house, my daughter threw me onto a mattress on the laundry room floor. Better than nothing, right? What she didn't know was that I had already transferred all my assets during my lifetime, and that property was no longer mine. I stared at the cold cement floor beneath the thin mattress, my arthritic fingers clutching the single blanket Stephanie had tossed at me. The washing machine's persistent drip echoed in the small space, a mocking reminder of how far I had fallen in my daughter's eyes. 72 years of life, and this is what it had come to. Sleeping next to detergent bottles and forgotten lint. "Mom, you should be grateful," Stephanie had said earlier, her voice dripping with that false sweetness I'd grown to recognize over the years. "Most people your age are in nursing homes. At least here you have family." Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth now. Just 3 months ago, I had been sleeping in the master bedroom of this house. The house I had paid off 20 years ago after working double shifts as a nurse. The house where I'd raised Stephanie after her father died. When she was only 12, Greg, my son-in-law, hadn't even looked me in the eye when they moved my things. He'd simply carried my dresser up to the attic, mumbling something about downsizing and making better use of the space. "We're just being practical, Barbara," he'd said when I protested. "Stephanie and I need the bedroom for our home office. Now that we're both working remotely, you hardly need all that space anyway." I heard them now, laughing upstairs, the sound of glasses clinking. They were celebrating something. Through the thin walls, I could make out Stephanie's voice. "To our new home office!" I pulled myself up with effort, my knees protesting as I made my way to the small window. Outside, the maple tree I'd planted when Stephanie was born swayed, gently in the evening breeze. I remembered how she used to swing from its branches, how I'd push her for hours until my arms ached. "Higher, Mommy, higher!" she would squeal, her laughter pure and innocent. Where had that little girl gone? When had she transformed into this cold woman who could banish her own mother to sleep among the dirty laundry? I thought back to last Christmas, when Greg had first brought up the idea of rearranging the living situation. "You know, Barbara," he'd said, swirling his expensive bourbon, purchased with my money, of course, "this house is really too big for just one person to maintain. Stephanie and I could help you manage it if we moved in." I should have seen it then. The gleam in his eye, the way Stephanie nodded too eagerly. But I'd been lonely since my sister passed, and the thought of having my daughter and grandson Jason under my roof had seemed like a blessing. What a fool I'd been. First, they'd taken over the garage for their cars. Then, the spare bedroom became Greg's study. Soon, they were redecorating the living room without even consulting me. And now, 3 months after moving in, they'd claimed my bedroom too. Tomorrow, I knew, they would suggest I sign some papers. Greg was always bringing papers for me to sign. "Just routine stuff, Barbara," he'd say. "Trust me, I'm looking out for your interests." What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly suspect, was that I had been watching them too. I had seen the way they inventoried my possessions when they thought I was napping. I had overheard their late-night conversations about my assets and how they could secure their future, and I had acted accordingly. My phone buzzed quietly beneath my pillow, my secret lifeline that Stephanie didn't know about. Martha's text. "Read. Everything set for Friday. Hang in there, Barb." I smiled for the first time that day. Let them celebrate tonight. Let them think they've won. They had no idea what was coming. As I settled back onto the thin mattress, listening to the sounds of their laughter above me, I closed my eyes and held tight to the truth that would soon shatter their world. This house, the The center of their greedy plans was already beyond their reach. And soon, they would discover just how thoroughly I had outsmarted them. The washing machine dripped steadily in the darkness. Drip, drip, like a clock counting down to the moment when everything would change. I had always believed that motherhood meant sacrifice. For 35 years, I had convinced myself that giving everything to Stephanie was what love looked like. The framed photograph on my makeshift nightstand captured a moment from that other life. Stephanie at her college graduation, her arms slung carelessly around my shoulders. I was beaming with pride, having worked 2 jobs to put her through that expensive liberal arts school she'd insisted on attending. "You're making an investment in my future, Mom," she had said. "Someday I'll take care of you." That someday had arrived, I supposed, in the form of a threadbare mattress and the constant hum of the dryer. I winced as I sat up, my back stiff from another restless night. Through the small window, I could see the garden I'd tended for decades. Greg had mentioned yesterday that they were thinking of updating it, removing my roses to install some modern rock feature Stephanie had seen in a magazine. The door opened without a knock, and Stephanie appeared with a mug of lukewarm coffee. "Morning, Mom. Got a busy day ahead, so we need the laundry room in an hour. You should probably get dressed and move to the sunroom until dinner." The sunroom was really just a small enclosed porch with a plastic chair. This was my life now, being shuffled from one insufficient space to another in my own home. "Frank called yesterday," I said carefully, watching her reaction. Frank had been my husband's closest friend and our financial advisor for decades. Stephanie's smile tightened. "What did he want?" "Just checking in," I replied, noting how quickly her interest had sparked. "Old memories?" She nodded, already turning away. "Greg and I are meeting with the contractor today about expanding the kitchen. Don't answer the door if anyone comes by." After she left, I pulled out the small notebook I kept hidden inside my pillowcase and made another entry. I'd been documenting everything since the day they moved in, every slight, every restriction, every conversation about my assets. My mind drifted back to the day Robert died, 23 years ago. Massive heart attack at 49. One moment, we were planning our anniversary trip, and the next, I was a widow with a 12-year-old daughter. We'd had insurance, of course, and Robert had been smart with investments. But raising Stephanie alone, giving her everything she wanted, the right clothes, the dance lessons, the expensive school trips, had slowly drained those resources. I never remarried, though there had been opportunities. My world revolved around my daughter. When she brought home mediocre grades, I hired tutors. When she wrecked her first car, I bought her another. When she dropped out of graduate school, I paid off her student loans. "Mom, no one completes a PhD these days unless they want to be poor forever," she'd explained, as if I were the naive one. Then she met Greg. Handsome, charming Greg with his sales job and his expensive tastes. I remember how he'd surveyed our house during his first visit, his eyes lingering on the antique grandfather clock that had been in Robert's family for generations. "Beautiful piece," he'd said. "Must be worth a fortune." They'd married quickly, too. Quickly. And then came Jason, my only grandchild. Despite their flaws, I couldn't help but love that little boy. He had Robert's kind eyes and curious mind. Now, 13, he was the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see me. The sound of Greg's voice drifted down from upstairs. "Did you talk to her about the papers?" His voice had that impatient edge it always carried when discussing me. "Not yet," Stephanie replied. "Let's wait until after the kitchen renovation is approved. No need to upset her yet." I smiled grimly. If only they knew about the meetings I'd been having while they were at work. The quiet conversations with lawyers and bankers. The papers I had signed. Not their papers, but my own. My phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Lunch today? I'll pick you up at noon." Martha had been my friend for over 40 years. She'd warned, Me about letting Stephanie and Greg move in. "They're vultures, Barb," she'd said bluntly. "They'll pick you clean and toss you aside." I'd defended them then. Now I was grateful for her foresight and help. I typed back, "Yes. Need to get documents from safe deposit box." The sound of Jason's footsteps on the stairs made me quickly pocket my phone. He appeared in the doorway, his lanky teenage frame, filling the space differently than his mother's had. "Morning, Grandma," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Dad said I should help you move to the sunroom." Unlike his parents, Jason's eyes held genuine concern. He lowered his voice. "I brought you something." From his pocket, he pulled a small MP3 player and earbuds. "It has all those old songs you like. I downloaded them for you." Tears pricked my eyes as I took the small gift. "Thank you, sweetheart." Jason glanced nervously over his shoulder before whispering, "I don't like how they're treating you, Grandma. It's not right." I squeezed his hand. "Everything will be all right. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns." He nodded, helping me gather my meager belongings to relocate for the day. As we walked slowly to the sunroom, I realized that there would be collateral damage when my plan came to fruition. Jason would be caught in the middle of the storm was about to unleash. But perhaps that was necessary too. He needed to learn that there were consequences for cruelty, a lesson his parents had clearly failed to teach him. From the sunroom window, I watched as Greg measured the garden. No doubt, planning its destruction. Stephanie stood beside him, nodding enthusiastically. They thought they were designing their future. They had no idea they were standing on quicksand. My phone buzzed again. "Martha. Everything in place. Friday will change everything. 3 more days." I could endure the laundry room, the sunroom, the condescension, for just 3 more days. Days in the Patterson household had developed a predictable rhythm of humiliation. This morning, like every morning, Stephanie rapped sharply on the laundry room door at precisely 7:15 a.m. "Mom, we need to do laundry. You'll have to move to the sunroom now." I carefully folded my nightgown and placed it in the small plastic bin that now contained my entire wardrobe. 3 dresses, 2 pairs of slacks, 5 blouses, undergarments, all that remained after Stephanie had organized my closet, donating most of my clothes to charity without asking. Such a waste to keep. "All these things you never wear," she'd explained when I discovered what she'd done. My favorite blue dress, the one Robert had loved, gone without a trace. As I made my slow way to the sunroom, I heard Greg on the phone in the kitchen, his voice hushed but clear enough. "We're making progress." "Yes, well, old people can be stubborn." "Don't worry, she'll sign. Stephanie knows how to handle her mother." I paused, my heart pounding. I knew they were anxious to get my signature on something, but what exactly? The house was already in my name alone. What more could they want? The answer came that afternoon when Stephanie entered the sunroom carrying a sheaf of papers. Greg, hovering in the doorway behind her. "Mom," she began, her voice carrying that artificial brightness I'd grown to dread. "We've been thinking about your future, about making sure you're taken care of properly." I placed my book down carefully. "Oh? You know how much we love having you here," she continued, not meeting my eyes. "But caring for an aging parent is challenging." Greg stepped forward. "What Stephanie is trying to say, Barbara, is that we're concerned about your well-being. We've looked into some very nice assisted living communities." The papers landed on my lap. Glossy brochures showing smiling elderly people playing cards and doing water aerobics. Places that cost thousands of dollars a month. Money they knew I had in savings. "This is the best solution for everyone," Stephanie added. "You'll have proper care, and we'll have peace of mind knowing you're safe." I paged through the brochures silently, noting the names of places I'd never heard of, all at least 3 hours away from my home, my friends, my doctor, my grandson. "And how would this be paid for?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Greg cleared his throat. Well, that's the other thing we wanted to discuss. He pulled out another document from behind the brochures. We've drafted a power of attorney. For your finances, it's just a precaution, of course. As you get older, managing money becomes difficult. I almost laughed. I'd been balancing my checkbook and paying my bills on time since before Stephanie was born. Meanwhile, my daughter and her husband were constantly refinancing their house to pay off credit card debt. I'll need to think about this, I said, setting the papers aside. Stephanie's smile faltered. What's there to think about? It's the best option for everyone. Perhaps, I replied, but I'd like my own lawyer to look over this power of attorney. First, Greg's face hardened. Your lawyer? Since when do you have a lawyer? Frank recommended someone, I said, watching his reaction carefully. Just in case. The mention of Frank, my longtime financial advisor, sent a flash of worry across his face. Mom, that's not necessary, Stephanie interjected quickly. Greg is perfectly capable of handling this. He's done all the research. I'm sure he had. Nevertheless, I said, I'll need time. They exchanged glances loaded with frustration before Stephanie nodded stiffly. Fine, but don't take too long. We've already put down a deposit to hold your spot. After they left, I pulled out my secret phone and texted Martha. They're making their move. Power of attorney and assisted living. Her response came quickly. Not surprised. Still on for tomorrow? Lawyer will meet us at my place. Yes, I typed back. They're getting impatient. That evening, as I sat at the dinner table, now relegated to the far end, away from the adult conversation, I watched Stephanie and Greg exchange meaningful glances. They'd been whispering all afternoon, clearly frustrated by my reluctance to immediately sign away my autonomy. Jason seemed to sense the tension, pushing his food around his plate quietly. Grandma, he said suddenly, can you help me with my history project this weekend? It's about the 1960s, and I thought maybe you could tell me what it was really like. Before I could answer, Stephanie cut in. Jason, Grandma might not be here this weekend. We're looking into some new living arrangements for her. Jason's fork clattered against his plate. What? Why can't she stay here? It's complicated, sport, Greg replied. Grandma needs special care now. No, she doesn't, Jason protested. She takes care of herself just fine. She even helped me with my math last week when you were too busy. Stephanie shot me an accusatory look as if I'd deliberately turned her son against her. That's enough, Jason. This is an adult decision. After dinner, as I made my way back to the laundry room, I heard footsteps behind me. Jason stood in the hallway, his young face troubled. They're trying to get rid of you, aren't they? He asked, bluntly. I sighed, unsure how to protect him from the ugly truth. Your parents think they're doing what's best. It's about money, isn't it? His perception surprised me. I heard Dad talking on the phone about your assets and liquidating stuff. My chest tightened. So Greg was already planning to sell my possessions, family heirlooms, keepsakes, memories. Jason, I said carefully, sometimes adults make decisions based on what they want rather than what's right. But I want you to know something. I paused, hearing Stephanie's approaching footsteps. I'll be fine, I finished quickly. No matter what happens. As Stephanie rounded the corner, her eyes narrowed, suspiciously at our private conversation. Jason, homework. Now, she commanded. Then turning to me, Mom, I don't want you filling his head with your complaints. He doesn't need to be involved in adult matters. After they left, I sat on my laundry room mattress and pulled out my notebook, again, documenting the day's events in careful detail. Tomorrow would be crucial. Martha would pick me up for our lunch date, and I would finally set in motion the plan I'd been crafting for months. They thought I was just a helpless old woman they could push around, manipulate, and discard. They had no idea that I'd been watching them, anticipating their every move. As I turned out the light, I heard Greg and Stephanie arguing upstairs. "She's being difficult on purpose," Stephanie hissed. "We need that power of attorney before she talks to anyone else." Greg's response chilled me. "Don't worry, one way or another we'll get her to sign." Martha's ancient Buick pulled up precisely at noon, just as Stephanie and Greg were leaving for lunch with what Greg called potential investors. I'd heard enough of their whispered conversations to know they were desperately trying to secure funding for another of Greg's doomed business ventures. "Just be back by 3, Stephanie reminded me as she applied another coat of lipstick. "The contractor is coming to measure for the kitchen remodel, and you need to be out of the way." Out of the way, the phrase that had come to define my existence in my own home. "Of course, dear," I replied, the forced pleasantness in my voice making my jaw ache. As soon as their car disappeared down the street, I hurried as fast as my arthritic knees would allow to Martha's waiting vehicle. "My God, Barbara," Martha exclaimed as I settled into the passenger seat. "You look exhausted." Martha had never been one to sugarcoat things. After 45 years of friendship, we were well beyond platitudes. "Sleeping on a laundry room floor will do that to you," I responded. Dryly. Martha's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she pulled away from the curb. "I still can't believe they've done this to you. After everything you've sacrificed for that girl." "Belief is a luxury, Martha. I'm dealing with reality now." We drove in comfortable silence for a while, passing the familiar landmarks of the town, where I'd spent most of my adult life. The elementary school where Stephanie had once performed as the lead in the spring musical. The park where I'd pushed her on the swings every Sunday after church. The hospital where I'd worked night shifts to pay for her braces, her prom dresses, her first car. Martha parked not at a restaurant, but in front of a small, discreet office building on the edge of town. The sign read, "Harrington Legal Services." "Ready?" Martha asked, her eyes concerned but encouraging. I nodded, gathering my purse and the folder of documents I'd been carefully collecting and hiding from Stephanie and Greg. Inside, James Harrington was waiting for us. A distinguished black man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, he rose to greet me with a firm handshake. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been looking forward to meeting you in person. Your friend Martha has told me quite a bit about your situation." For the next hour, we reviewed everything. The trust I had secretly established 3 years ago after first noticing Greg's too keen interest in my finances. The transfer of my house into that trust, with specific provisions. The documentation of Stephanie and Greg's treatment of me since they moved in. The power of attorney they were now pressuring me to sign. "Your foresight was remarkable," James commented, reviewing the trust documents. "Most people don't think to protect themselves until it's too late." "I was a nurse for 35 years, Mr. Harrington. I've seen how quickly families can turn when money and property are involved. I hoped Stephanie would be different, but I prepared for the possibility that she wouldn't be." He nodded, making notes on a legal pad. "And you're certain you want to proceed with this?" "They're planning to put me in a nursing home, Mr. Harrington. 3 hours away from everything I know. They want access to my savings, money I worked my entire life to accumulate. And they're doing this while sleeping in my bedroom and planning renovations to my kitchen." My voice remained steady, betraying none of the hurt and betrayal churning inside me. "Yes, I'm certain." "Very well." He turned to his computer, typing rapidly. "I'll have the final documents ready for your signature tomorrow. Then we can proceed with serving the formal notice on Friday, as planned." Martha squeezed my hand under the table. "What about Jason?" she asked, knowing my concern for my grandson. James smiled gently. "The educational trust Mrs. Patterson established for Jason remains completely separate and protected. His college education is secure, regardless of what happens with his parents." As we prepared to leave, James handed me a small device. "A voice recorder," he explained. "Given what you've told me about their increasing pressure tactics, it might be wise to document any conversations about the power of attorney or your finances." Back in Martha's car, I felt lighter than I had in months. The plan was in motion. After years of watching, waiting, and quietly preparing, I was finally taking back control. "Want to get some real lunch before I take you back to prison?" Martha asked, only half joking. "Yes, but first I need to make another stop." I gave her directions to Riverview Park, where a bench overlooking the river had been dedicated to Robert after his death. I hadn't visited in months, not since Stephanie had started restricting my outings. Martha waited in the car while I made my way slowly to the bench. The bronze plaque gleamed in the sunlight. Robert Patterson, beloved husband, father, and friend. Sat down, feeling closer to him here than anywhere else. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Robert," I whispered. "She's still our daughter, but I don't recognize her anymore. I don't think you would either." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above me, and I allowed myself a moment of grief, not just for my late husband, but for the daughter I had raised and lost to greed, for the family that might have been. The peace was broken by my phone buzzing with a text from Jason. "Where are you? Mom and Dad came home early. They're mad." I quickly replied, "Having lunch with Martha. We'll be home soon." Another text followed. Immediately. "Dad is saying you're probably meeting with lawyers. Mom is crying." My heart raced. How could they know? Had they been monitoring my phone? Following me? "Tell them I'll be home in 20 minutes, I texted back, then turned to hurry back to Martha's car. "We need to go," I said urgently as I slid into the passenger seat. "They suspect something." Martha drove quickly but carefully back to my house. As we pulled up, I could see Stephanie pacing on the front porch, her face twisted with anger. Greg stood beside her, his posture rigid. "Want me to come in with you?" Martha asked, glaring at the couple on the porch. "No," I said, steeling myself. "This is something I need to handle alone." I emerged from the car, nodding goodbye to Martha. As I approached the house, Stephanie stormed down the steps towards me. "Where were you?" she demanded. "And don't say, 'Lunch with Martha.' We called the country club. They said you weren't there." I met her gaze steadily. "We ate somewhere else. I wasn't aware I needed to provide an itinerary." Greg stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. "Barbara, if you're meeting with lawyers or financial advisors behind our backs, like you've been meeting with assisted living facilities behind mine?" I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. They exchanged worried glances, clearly unsettled by my newfound confidence. "Mom," Stephanie said, her voice suddenly softer, calculated. "We're only trying to help you. You're getting older. You need support." I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, and wondered how the sweet child I'd raised had become this manipulative stranger. "I think I'd like to rest now," I said simply, walking past them into the house. In the hallway, I spotted Jason, watching from the staircase, his eyes wide with concern. I gave him a reassuring smile. Back in my laundry room, I sat on the mattress and pulled out the voice recorder James had given me. I placed it carefully under my pillow, then took out my notebook to document this latest confrontation. 2 more days, I reminded myself. 2 more days until everything changed. Friday morning arrived with an unusual stillness. For the first time in weeks, I didn't dread opening my eyes to face another day of humiliation. Instead, I felt a peculiar calm, the kind that comes not from peace, but from certainty. Stephanie knocked on my door at the usual time, but instead of her typical impatient rap, her knuckles barely made contact with the wood. "Mom?" Her voice carried forced cheerfulness. "I made your favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes." I hadn't seen blueberry pancakes in this house since before they moved in. The sudden generosity could only mean one thing. Today was the day they planned to get my signature on that power of attorney. "I'll be right out," I called, quickly retrieving the voice recorder from beneath my pillow and slipping it into the pocket of my robe. In the kitchen, the scene was elaborately staged. The table was set with the good china, my good china, which had been packed away in boxes since they'd claimed the dining room needed updating. Greg was already seated, his face arranged in an approximation of warmth. Jason sat silently, watching the performance with suspicious eyes. "Good morning, Barbara," Greg said, standing to pull out my chair. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I settled into the seat, noting the stack of documents sitting just to the side of the table, poorly concealed beneath a magazine. "Yes, quite lovely," I replied, accepting the plate of pancakes Stephanie set before me with a flourish. "I thought we could all spend some time together today," Stephanie continued, pouring coffee into my cup. "Maybe look through some old photo albums? It's been ages since we reminisced." I took a bite of pancake, which was undercooked in the middle. Stephanie had never mastered my recipe. "That sounds nice," I said, "though I thought you and Greg had that meeting with the kitchen contractor today." A flash of annoyance crossed Stephanie's face before she recovered. "Oh, we rescheduled. Family comes first, after all. Family comes first." The phrase that had guided my entire life, weaponized now as a tool of manipulation. I ate slowly, watching as Stephanie and Greg exchanged glances, clearly impatient for me to finish so they could proceed with their plan. Jason remained quiet, observing everything with growing unease. When I finally set down my fork, Greg cleared his throat. "Actually, Barbara, before we get to those photo albums, there's something we need to discuss." He reached for the papers beside the table. "These documents we mentioned, for your protection?" "The power of attorney," I said flatly. Stephanie's smile tightened. "Yes, and some paperwork for Sunny Pines. They've reserved a lovely room for you, but they need these forms completed today." Greg slid the papers across the table. "It's all very standard. Nothing to worry about." I looked down at the documents, noting the multiple signature lines marked with bright yellow tabs. Power of attorney, medical directives, financial disclosures, all designed to strip me of any remaining autonomy. "I see," I said quietly, reaching into my pocket to switch on the voice recorder. "And if I sign these, what happens next?" Stephanie leaned forward, her voice softening to what she probably thought was a reassuring tone. "We'll help you pack your essentials this weekend, and you can move to Sunny Pines on Monday. They have a wonderful activity program and a shuttle bus for shopping trips." "And the house?" I asked, watching their reactions carefully. Greg waved, a dismissive hand. "We'll take care of everything here. You won't need to worry about maintenance or bills anymore." "That's very thoughtful," I said. "And my belongings? My furniture? The jewelry your father gave me?" A flash of guilt crossed Stephanie's face, quickly replaced by practiced concern. "We'll keep everything safe, Mom, though the house might need some updating, so we might store some of the older pieces." "I see," I repeated, letting the weight of their deception hang in the air. "And what about the money in my accounts?" "The investments?" Greg shifted uncomfortably. "With the power of attorney, we'll manage all of that for you. Make sure you're well taken care of." "How convenient," I murmured. "Mom," Stephanie said, a hint of irritation creeping into her tone. "This isn't a negotiation. It's what's best for everyone." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw nothing of the child I had raised. All the bedtime stories, the skinned knees I had bandaged, the tears I had wiped away, the sacrifices I had made. None of it had mattered. In the end, I was just an inconvenience to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. "Everyone?" I asked softly. "Or just you and Greg?" Stephanie's facade cracked. "For God's sake, Mom, we're trying to help you. Why do you have to be so difficult?" "Because it's my life," I said. "My home. My money." Greg's face darkened. "Barbara, be reasonable. You can't manage on your own anymore. You need us." I reached for the pen they had placed beside the documents, watching as their expressions shifted to relief. I uncapped it slowly, deliberately. "You know, I said conversationally. It's interesting that you've already reserved a room at Sunny Pines. That place costs nearly $5,000 a month. Were you planning to pay for that out of my savings? Or were you expecting Medicare to cover it? Stephanie blinked, clearly thrown by the question. Well, your accounts, of course. You've always been so good at saving. And after my savings are depleted? What then? Greg interjected. We're not going to let that happen, Barbara. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No, you wouldn't. Because once the money runs out, there would be no reason to maintain the pretense of caring for my welfare, would there? Stephanie gasped. Mom, how could you say such a thing? Instead of answering, I set the pen down and reached into my other pocket, pulling out a business card. I think it's time we had an honest conversation. But first, I should introduce you to someone. The doorbell rang, precisely on schedule. That would be James Harrington, I said calmly. My attorney. The color drained from Greg's face. Your what? My attorney, I repeated, rising slowly from my chair. He's here to discuss the trust I established 3 years ago, the one that now owns this house and most of my other assets. Stephanie stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Trust? What trust? What are you talking about? I moved toward the door, feeling stronger with each step. Why don't we let him explain? As I opened the front door, I heard Greg muttering frantically to Stephanie behind me. James stood on the porch, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, a leather portfolio under his arm. Mrs. Patterson, he said with a respectful nod, are you ready? I glanced back at my daughter and son-in-law, their faces frozen in confusion and dawning horror. Jason watched from the kitchen doorway, eyes wide, but lips curved in a hint of a smile. Yes, Mr. Harrington, I replied. I believe it's time for the truth to come out. The weeks following what Jason now called the reckoning passed in a blur of activity. After James had outlined the terms of my trust, explaining in precise legal language that the house was no longer mine to sign away, that most of my assets were protected, and that Stephanie and Greg had exactly 30 days to vacate the property, I experienced a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. Vindication, because the look on their faces when they realized they had been outmaneuvered was something I would never forget. Sorrow, because no mother should ever have to protect herself from her own child. I now sat on the balcony of my new apartment at Willow Creek Retirement Community, watching a pair of cardinals build a nest in the oak tree outside. Not a nursing home, not a sterile assisted living facility in some distant town, but a vibrant independent living community just 10 minutes from my old neighborhood. Martha sat across from me, her gardening hat tilted rakishly as she sipped her iced tea. So, she said, setting down her glass, have you heard from them? I shook my head. Not directly. Jason calls every few days. He says they're staying with Greg's brother while they look for a place. And how are you feeling about all of it? I considered the question carefully. The initial shock and anger had faded, replaced by a measured acceptance. I did what I had to do, I said finally. I couldn't allow them to take everything I've worked for, to ship me off somewhere to be forgotten. Martha nodded, understanding as always. She'd been the one to help me move, to arrange for the furniture I wanted to keep, to make this new place feel like home. A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Martha raised an eyebrow. Expecting company? Just Jason, I said, rising to answer it. He mentioned he might stop by. But when I opened the door, it wasn't just Jason standing there. Stephanie stood slightly behind him, her eyes downcast, clutching her purse with white-knuckled fingers. Hi, Grandma, Jason said, giving me a quick hug. Mom wanted to come too. Is that okay? I hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. Of course, come in. Stephanie entered cautiously, as if stepping into unknown territory. In a way, I suppose she was. This place represented my independence, my refusal to be controlled or diminished. It was wholly mine in a way. The family home, despite its legal ownership, had never been allowed to remain. Martha gave me a questioning look, and I nodded slightly, letting her know it was all right. She excused herself tactfully, promising to return tomorrow for our weekly bridge game. An awkward silence filled the room after Martha left. Jason, perceptive as always, broke the tension. "Your place is really nice, Grandma. Way better than the laundry room." Despite everything, I laughed. Yes, it is rather an upgrade. Stephanie winced at the reference, her gaze fixed on the floor. "It's lovely, Mom," she said quietly. I gestured toward the living room. "Let's sit down, shall we?" As we settled onto the comfortable furniture I'd selected myself, I noted the changes in my daughter. The designer clothes and perfect makeup were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a ponytail. There was a humility in her posture I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Jason chattered about school, filling the silence with updates about his history project and the upcoming science fair. I listened attentively, asking questions, acknowledging his accomplishments. This was how family should be: supportive, interested, present. Eventually, Jason excused himself to check out the community game room I'd mentioned, leaving Stephanie and me alone. The silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken words. "I don't know where to start," Stephanie finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could try the truth," I suggested, not unkindly. She looked up then, her eyes brimming with tears. "We were wrong. So wrong. What we did to you, what I did to you, it was unforgivable." I remained silent, allowing her words to stand without contradiction. "The house, the power of attorney, Sunny Pines. It wasn't supposed to go that far," she continued. "At first we just thought we'd move in, temporarily, save some money. But then Greg started talking about the equity in the house, about your savings. And you listened," I finished for her. She nodded miserably. "I listened. I convinced myself it was for the best, that you needed our help. But really, we were the ones who needed help. We've been drowning in debt for years. Greg's business, failures, my spending. We were desperate." The confession didn't surprise me. I'd suspected as much from overheard conversations and the constant stream of packages arriving at the house. "Greg is furious," she continued. "He wanted to contest the trust, but our lawyer said it was ironclad." A hint of grudging admiration crept into her voice. "You really thought of everything." "I had to," I said simply. Stephanie wiped away a tear. "I don't know what happens now. Between us, I mean." I considered her question carefully. The hurt ran deep, the betrayal deeper still. Yet across from me sat not just the woman who had relegated me to a laundry room, but also the little girl who had once climbed into my lap for comfort, the teenager who had sobbed on my shoulder over her first heartbreak, the young woman I had walked down the aisle in her father's absence. "I don't know either," I admitted. "Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired, but Jason shouldn't be caught in the middle." She nodded, clearly having expected worse. "I've arranged for him to visit whenever he wants," I continued. "The trust I established will pay for his college education directly." That part was never in question. Stephanie's eyes widened. "You still did that for him? Even after everything?" "He's my grandson," I said simply. "He deserves a future unencumbered by adult mistakes." She looked down at her hands. "You're a better mother than I deserved." The words hung in the air between us, raw and honest. I didn't contradict her, but I didn't turn away either. "I should go," she said finally, standing. "Thank you for seeing me." I walked her to the door where Jason was waiting, having returned from his exploration of the facilities. "This place is awesome, Grandma. They have a pool and everything," I smiled, genuinely pleased by his enthusiasm. "You're welcome anytime. Jason, your room is always ready." I'd made sure that my new apartment had a second bedroom, specifically for my grandson's visits. As they prepared to leave, Stephanie paused. "Mom, I know it's not enough, but I am sorry, truly sorry." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Sincerity. Not manipulation, not calculation, just honesty. "I know," I said softly. And I did. After they left, I returned to the balcony, watching as their car pulled away. The future of our relationship remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, there was a possibility of something real, something based on respect rather than exploitation. The cardinal pair were still working on their nest, carrying twigs and bits of string, building something new from scattered pieces. I smiled at the symbolism. My phone buzzed with a message from Martha. "Survived the invasion? Bridge club tomorrow still on?" I typed back, "Yes to both. Bring wine. Stories to tell." As the evening light softened around me, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because everything was resolved. It wasn't, and might never be completely, but because I had finally honored my own worth. The mattress on the laundry room floor seemed like a distant memory now. I had reclaimed not just my dignity, but my future. At 72, I had started a new chapter, and this one would be written entirely on my own terms.